You can't imagine how thrilled I am to see you unless you ever stood up and tried to speak to empty seats. That is not fun. Can you hear okay? Everything okay? All right. I have told Jan that it's a little bit dangerous to give me a lectern and a microphone and then to bill the event as a conversation, but because I may abuse my power, by standing here. But she is going to signal me when she thinks it's time for me to stop. Because truly, I would like for you to contribute. I would like for you to contribute at least a question. And surely you will have some questions. One of the problems I've had in getting ready is I'm trying to say too many things. And that is a temptation because 30 years in the Arab world is a long time. And I have stories to back up points I want to make. And so I hope I will be able to stay on my subject and to help you to do what I think that we all want to do. We read the news and it's so difficult to think about the Middle East. What in the world are we supposed to think? How can we fathom what is going on? And I think that mostly what we see is war. We see violence. And so I want to help you to think a little bit better than just to see war. Because I actually was asked once, here in North Carolina, I was asked, are those people just wired differently than us so that they want to fight? No way is that true. So here's the first point I want to make. There's a lot more than a war going on in the Middle East. What's going on is a great upheaval, which is social, it is religious, it is political, it involves the geography and the history and everything that we know and don't know about the Arab people. It is their time in history to solve some problems. One of the problems that they are dealing with is that Islam has had some difficulty with adjusting to the modern way of living. And it is natural because they object sometimes on moral grounds. They object for some very good reasons. The way they see the world is different from the way it looks when they see most of us living it. And so they have not accepted the way of life that they are having to interact with in the larger world. And there's a battle going on within Islam itself. The Sunnis and the Shias are the two major Muslim groups. And they differ on who is the true Muslim, who should be the leader. They originally divided over the issue of succession from the Prophet Muhammad. And perhaps you know that. But that is a struggle that continues to go on. And that struggle affects Lebanon, and it affects every country in which there are both Sunnis and Muslims. And it is behind some of the violence, not all of it. Also within Islam, there is the struggle between moderates and extremists. I don't know otherwise how to term it. Maybe those words are not precise. But there are those who want to interpret the Quran one way, and those who want to interpret another way. And I know that you understand that we have the same conflicts within the Christian faith. It is possible, for instance, to take the Bible and choose passages the way you want to choose, and decide that our God is very violent, that he will kill his enemies, that he will order us to kill our enemies, that Jesus would go along, if you had a sword. And it is possible to choose passages to prove the opposite. And so we have a conflict that we can understand that they have it, because we have it also. And we have extremism, and we have moderates, and we have different ways of looking at the world, and all of us claim that this is the biblical way or this is the Christian way. So, and then the Middle East has a major problem, which is they have not learned how to live with diversity. I understand that this is an important subject here at Elon, because you know that we also don't live perfectly with our diversity. But in the Arab world, everybody, in the whole Middle East, everybody seems to feel that some group has to be in control. One group is on top, and everybody else is somehow a little bit second class, if not subjugated by the other. And this causes tension between the minority groups and the bigger groups, whoever the minority is. They sometimes feel persecuted. And everybody wants some power. Everybody wants more power. And so this is a constant struggle that affects the Middle East, and that is a major part of what is happening in the Middle East right now. It's a question of who is going to be on top. Now, I'm sure many of you read the Christian Century. The newest Christian Century may not have reached you yet. I didn't get my print version, but online I saw an article that's coming out in the newest Christian Century. It is written by a man, I'm sorry I have forgotten his name. I only had time just to scan the article before I left California. The man lived in Lebanon for part of the time that we lived there, like in the 70s. And then he went on to other countries and became something of an authority on the Middle East. And in this article, he tries to explain what's happening in the Middle East. And it's a good article. You should read it. But he calls all of this a sorting out. He says when it's done, most of the Christian population will be gone somewhere else. The minorities will have to figure out where they can settle down and be safe. There will be this constant shakedown until everybody finds his new place. Well, I find this somehow true. It's true, and it's useful. At the same time, when I read it, I feel that it's callous. And I know you can't say everything in one article, so I forgive him for that. But I want to tell you a story that's about sorting out. I originally planned to read it from my book, but it's in scattered pieces through the book, which makes it difficult for me to go from place to place to read it. So I'm going to try to tell you this story. First of all, I have to explain that in 1976, Syria invaded Lebanon. There was already civil war in Lebanon. I don't know what Syria's motivation was. I can't analyze that. I can give different possibilities. But Syria has always coveted Lebanon. They have had the idea that Lebanon should be a part of greater Syria, as indeed it was in some past period of history. So the Syrians invaded, and when my book begins, 30,000 Syrian troops were occupying Lebanon. We couldn't go up the road. We couldn't go from our home to our office, from our office home again, without the permission of Syrian soldiers who were standing in our streets. And I can add as an aside that when you experience that, you tend to develop a resentment. Whatever was the first reason the soldiers were there, for whatever reason they came there, you begin to think, what right do you have to stand on my street and tell me that I can go up the road, or tell me to lift my trunk so that you can search me? So this was the situation in Lebanon. And then the war got much, much worse. Many things happened. Time passed, a few years passed, and Israel invaded. And the Syrians went out as the Israelis came in, and the Israelis occupied the area. And then they withdrew, after a year or so, they withdrew from the area that we were in, but they were occupying the area across a canyon from us. We lived in the hills, on the mountain, we really call it there. And with our back, we faced the other way, not Beirut. And there was a beautiful canyon and a beautiful mountain on the other side, and the road to Damascus on that road over there, and many towns. And all of that area was occupied. The population of that area was Druze and Maronite Christian, mostly Maronite Christians, but other Christians too. And through history, there had been conflict in the Shuf between the Druze, which is a kind of a secretive sect of Islam, and the Christians. So the Israelis occupied that part and stayed. And all the time that they were occupying that part, Druze and Christian militias fought one another. And the Israelis ignored it. They let them fight. So that we dreaded the day when the Israelis would leave, if they did, which we thought that they would do. But what we did not predict was that they would not coordinate that with the Lebanese army. So the Lebanese army couldn't go up. The Lebanese army was in a town called Souk al-Gharb, over this way. I'm looking at the mountain. You're on the mountain over there. Every one of you is a village on the mountain. And when they began to withdraw, as we expected, the Syrians came in behind them to occupy the Shuf again. And the Israelis went out, and the Lebanese army could not come. And there was this gigantic 3 or 4 direction battle, everybody fighting everybody in the Shuf, and we had the front row seat to watch that battle. There was a village called Ras al-Matan that we faced. We could see Ras al-Matan from our windows. We had friends in Ras al-Matan. The Freiha family Salim Freha had been our Arabic teacher, and he was from Ras Al Matin. During the fighting, among the horrible news things we heard was that 30 members of the Freha family had been massacred in their homes in Ras Al Matin. In Bahamdoun, a city, a mostly Muslim city, up on the top of the mountain on the highway, there was a family named Khairallah. Mr. Khairallah was a crippled man. He had polio. He walked with a great deal of energy, but with a big limp. And his wife, he was married to a Polish woman who drove him everywhere that he went. They had 4 handsome little sons, the eldest 9 years old. And they were Christians, and they came all the way down the mountain and went to Beirut to church on Sundays. And we knew this family. We saw them when they were baptized together. It happened that the 9-year-old son in their family had gone away to summer camp just for a week. He was in a camp for just a week. So he was not at home when the battle started. When it was time to go home, he couldn't go home because this huge battle, it lasted from September 4 until September 26. And he was taken in by a group of priests who took him to a monastery along with a lot of other children. But when finally the battle simmered down and there was a ceasefire, the people began looking, the relatives of the Khairallahs, and their church began to look for the Khairallahs. They didn't respond to any messages. They put their names on the radio. There was a radio station that read the names of missing people. The Khairallahs did not respond. It's difficult to say Khairallah when your mouth is dry. There was a Christian village called Dar al-Qamar, which means the bridge to the moon or something, a house of the moon. That's what it means. And Dar al-Qamar had a population of 5,000 people. Between 30,000 and 40,000 people had fled to Dar al-Qamar. And they were isolated, and they couldn't get help. And people were starving to death in Dar al-Qamar. How can a little town of 5,000 people feed this mob that arrives? And after so much searching, finally, a relative was able to go to the home of the Khairallahs and found Nadim and Maria, his wife, their bodies. They were dead. Until today, nobody knows what happened to 3 little boys, 3 and 5 and 6. Friends, that is sorting out. When it happens on the ground, where it happens. And so part of what I want you to remember, one of the things you have to remember when you're thinking about the Middle East, okay, see it as a sorting out if you want. See that in 100 years something is going to be changed. In the meantime, this is people. This is dear people. This is people who just have one life like we do, and they didn't plan to spend it like this, you know? This is about people. People are suffering. People are hurting in every one of those situations that we read about. So don't forget that. When you read this article or articles like it, just remember. And I think, you know, my book, In Bogged Houses, is not a scholarly work. I'm not a scholar. It's not a sermon. It's not a history book. It's a story. And basically, it's my story. But you can't tell your story without talking about a lot of other people. And what my book does, what my book will do for you, is to give you a human face for the Middle East. You will see my friends, warts and all. You will know what kind of meals they cook, and what they talk about at the dinner table. And people have told me, somebody in Georgetown told me, you changed our whole perspective on the world, because we just had no idea of the people who live there. So that's what I want you to know about my book. That's what it can do for you. And I want you to know about the people and think about the people, because I experience myself the weariness we get from reading about some situations in the newspapers and seeing it on television. We get compassion fatigue. I do. Sometimes I think I can't care about everybody. And it's a real feeling. It's true. It's not sinful. That's the way we are. We're not big enough to carry it all. But if we're going to be involved in making any decisions that are related to the situation, remember that it's about people. Now I want you to understand, another thing I want you to understand is that Lebanon is a very crucial part of the Middle East. When I first lived in Lebanon, I was mystified so often by little things that happened. Like, for instance, there was the Khomeini revolution in Iran. And driving through Beirut, I saw Khomeini's picture, big posters on the walls. I thought, what's Khomeini's picture doing on the wall in Beirut, you know? Well, what it was doing there, somebody said to me, well, Lebanon is a mirror. It's like a mirror. Whatever is happening anywhere in the Middle East, you'll see it on the streets in Beirut. Well, that's very true, but actually the situation is that Lebanon is a microcosm of the entire Middle East. If it's in Iran, it's in Beirut. If it's in Iraq, it's in Beirut. I'm talking about philosophies, political views, problems, movies, ideas, everything. If it's anywhere, and if you can find it anywhere in the Arab world, you will find it in Lebanon. Lebanon is the most diverse country in the Middle East. And that diversity is both a weakness and a strength to Lebanon. Let me explain. One reason those posters were on the wall there in Beirut is that Iran tried to incite the same revolution in Lebanon. If they could get Lebanon, oh boy. And it didn't work. Even though the Lebanese were fighting with one another over their issues in the country and having this civil war, the Iranians could not succeed in inciting that revolution in Lebanon because the diversity of Lebanon saved it. I know that might be a little bit hard to understand. That's even a little bit hard for me to understand, but I know that this is a fact. This is what happened. Lebanon is also the most Christian country in the Middle East. There are 18 different religious communities in Lebanon, distinct communities, many of them Christians. But in Lebanon too, there is conflict about who is stronger than the other. And that's why Lebanon had the civil war that they had. We had an awful civil war that lasted off and on over 15 years. It was dreadful, and one day people just didn't pick up their guns and go and fight. We had had more than 200 ceasefires that didn't hold, and then one day with no ceasefire, people quit fighting. I thought, maybe we're just too tired. Maybe we're just too tired to go on. Now the Lebanese say that they learned just one thing from their civil war. They learned nobody here is strong enough to subjugate the other. Therefore, we have to live together. In Lebanon, they have to live together. It's that or suicide. Maybe that rings a bell in some other places. We know about the problems of living together. And I think we need to think about, as Americans, we need to see that there are things we can't do in the Middle East. We can't solve those issues between the Muslims. That's their fight. We don't even have a right to participate on either side of that argument. That's for them. But we do know something about the problems of living with diversity. Maybe, and you know what? You know what I'm absolutely sure of? Peace is not going to come out of the end of a gun. It's just not going to happen. I fully believe, from what I have seen and heard with my own ears, that every time we drop a bomb, we make another enemy. And we're just collecting enemies. But there must be some contribution that we could make in the area of ideas. And I wish that we Christians would influence our government to help the Middle East learn to live with diversity. Help them in an honest way by saying, we have this problem too. We know how hard this is, but we can do it. And then another thing is that Rafiq Hariri, Rafiq or Saad, the son of the prime minister who was assassinated. He was in Washington recently, and he told Obama, Lebanon is going to go under unless we get more international help with the refugees. The infrastructure of Lebanon is taxed to the breaking point. All those Syrians, those enemies, the people who were in our country with their guns, came back to Lebanon with no guns, no shelter, no place to sleep, nothing to eat, no jobs, penniless, helpless. Part of the good news is there's not a church in Lebanon that is not ministering to those refugees. The Syrians who came to Lebanon as refugees they're finding now opposition because the government, Lebanon is in a very hard position. But Lebanon has always taken refugees. Lebanon has an open border and people just come. They get there. One way or another, they get there. But Lebanon has a population of 4 million people. And there are now 2 million Syrian and Iraqi refugees. Can you imagine? I think, what would the situation be in our country if in 2 years' time our homeless population increased to 150 million. That's how many homeless people we would have to have in this country to experience what Lebanon is experiencing. There's not enough of anything for all of these people. And even the United Nations feeding program ended in December last year because they were out of money. So what the world can do to save Lebanon is, for goodness sakes, help them feed and house these people. It's an incredible humanitarian disaster. And I have one more thing, one more point. We can't think straight and honestly about the Middle East if we don't take into consideration our own guilt. If we don't have any guilt about the Middle East, we're not thinking very well. We did a lot to make things the way they are. We did a lot. You know, Lebanon was invaded 3 times in 30 years. 2 of those times by our neighbor in the south, Israel. The original plan for Israel included most of southern Lebanon. Lebanon almost up to Beirut was in the original plan. Every time they come, the Lebanese are not sure they will leave. And so much of the strife that happened in Lebanon during our civil war happened because of the establishment of the State of Israel on Lebanon's southern border. And I'm not saying that the Jews didn't need a home, they needed a home. But for the world to say, okay, take the Palestinians home, let them go somewhere else, that doesn't solve a problem. And we help to do that, where our own role in that is major. And the support. And you know, all this negotiation with Iran about the bomb, you know, there's an elephant in the room that everybody ignores in all of those articles you read about it. The elephant is Israel has it. We gave it to Israel. We helped Israel have it. And that's one of the reasons why Iran wants it. And you know, Iran has done us so much dirt. Iran blew up the American embassy. I was almost there. I barely missed it. I had a problem in my office, so I couldn't get to the embassy, so I wasn't there when the bomb went off, when the bomb hit the building. The Iranians blew up our Marines. That story is in my book too. They killed the president, Malcolm Kerr, who was the president of the American University. I'm not saying, okay, Iran is the good guys. Well, you know what I am saying? If we want to divide the world into good and evil, we got to start down the middle of my heart and yours. You can't go to Lebanon and pick out the good guys and the bad guys. You will never figure it out because everybody is good and lovable and everybody is capable of evil. And the conflicts in the Middle East are so mixed up that right now, Lebanon is struggling whether or not they should be fighting ISIS that's right on their border. Because when they fight ISIS, then they're helping Assad, whom they don't want to help. It's so complicated. So if you can't sort it out, don't worry about sorting it out. Just remember these big things that I've tried to tell you. The other thing that we did, I don't know what we thought would happen afterwards. But the reason why this war didn't start before all this conflict in the Middle East was that secular dictators were ruling some places. Iraq, Syria, Egypt. And under the secular dictators, the minorities were safe. And when we invaded Iraq, and overthrew Saddam, we removed the safety net from the Christians. And there are hardly any Christians left in Iraq. Sorting it out. So we can't point fingers at other people for how bad they are and how violent they are and what a mess they're in when we helped to create the mess that they're in. So I just think, when we're solving a problem with another individual, if we have done something to make the problem the way it is, we have to admit that in order to solve the problem. So that's why I think that we have to take that into consideration. And I have one more thing to say. Don't be afraid. What terrorists want is for you to be afraid. When you are afraid, they have won. And actually, fear is not becoming of a Christian. Jesus told us over and over and over, don't be afraid. There's a lot of literature written to make you afraid. There are a lot of articles in magazines and newspapers online trying to scare you to death. Why? Because if you're afraid, you will get in their fight. You will join the fight. Fear drove the war in Lebanon. Everybody was afraid of somebody. A little boy from a Muslim family went to school and said to the principal's wife, who saw him in the playground, he was crying, and she said, "What's wrong, honey?" He said, "The Christians are going to kill us all." A little Muslim boy had heard that at home. The Christians are going to kill us all. And she said, "Well, I'm a Christian, and I wouldn't hurt you for anything. I love you." And suddenly, he was okay. And he skipped off, and he went to class, and he was all right. But doesn't that tell you a lot? Everybody was afraid of somebody. Once in Lebanon, we had something like 80 people died on that road up there, the road to Damascus, because it snowed, and nobody was expecting the snow. And the Christians were afraid to go to, if they were stopped on the road, they were stuck in the snow. They were afraid to go to that Muslim village to get help. And so they sat in their cars and froze to death. And the Muslims who were close to a Christian village sat in their cars and froze to death. Because everybody was afraid of everybody. And first we fear, and then we hate, and then we kill. So don't take the first step, okay? Find the reasons for hope. Find the reasons for faith. Look for what God is doing, and don't be afraid.